If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. Welcome back to another new episode of The Logger Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. I'm joined by my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal, Paulo Alves, who you can follow on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA. Me, I'm at Ben Dubose. So the last couple of podcasts we recorded were relative downers since the Rockets were coming off 1-3 stretches over the preceding 4 games. Not this time. The Rockets are unbeaten since we last recorded a week ago, having won 4 consecutive games overall and 11 straight at home. Entering Friday, they're 12-9, and they've officially passed the quarter pole of the NBA's 2023-24 season. And at this moment, they're translating to a win pace of about 47-35. And let's be honest, 47 wins for a team that's finished last or tied for last in the Western Conference in each of the last 3 years. That's just a phenomenal job by head coach Ime Udoka and his new look Rockets team. That's not to say that everything has been perfect. It has been a bad week for Jalen Green, at least thus far. And Alperen Sengun has gone through his share of struggles as well. Both were benched in the fourth quarter of Wednesday's win against Memphis, and Jalen was also out for Monday's fourth quarter against San Antonio. And yeah, I know on paper both of those are subpar opponents, but even though it feels like the Rockets were a bit underwhelming in those games, look, the reality is they won each by double digits, and that's not easy to do against any NBA team. Being able to grind out wins, even when you're not at your best, that's the mark of being a good team, which I think we both agree the Rockets are. And we've talked plenty about how having a top 5 rated defense, Rockets currently at number 2 in defensive rating, last I checked, that can give you a ton of margin for error when it comes to having a bad shooting night or anything else that might randomly go wrong on a given night in the NBA. So with that in mind, let's start our discussion with the good, because clearly, as evidenced by all these wins, the good is outweighing the bad, otherwise you'd be losing. And when we talk about the good, especially this week, it has to start with Tari Eason, who has simply been phenomenal in these wins against the Spurs and Grizzlies, averaging about 22 points and 14 rebounds in under 30 minutes per game. Just phenomenal efficiency and putting up monster numbers, including in the second half and the fourth quarter. More on his surge into the closing lineup momentarily. We should also mention Jabari Smith Jr. He's really improved his rebounding of late, and that's playing a role in being able, especially against the Grizzlies, to play Tari Eason in that closing lineup. Over the last 10 games, Jabari is at nearly 11 rebounds per game, and his rebounding rate is above 16%. That's up from below 7 and a rate of just above 11 over his first 11 games. To me, it looks like GM Rafael Stone absolutely nailed that 2022 draft class, and between Tari, Jabari, and Sengun, the Houston front court should be in fantastic shape for a really long time. But we've talked about Jabari and Sengun in our recent pods, and again, Sengun has actually struggled a bit, which we'll get to. So I want to use this first segment to really give Tari his shine, because to me, it's the specific way that he's going out and getting these numbers that gives me so much hope, not just in the short term, but also the long term for how the Rockets can put this puzzle together. This is the thing. When Tari was drafted in 2022, we knew the scouting report. 6'8" athlete, massive 7'2" wingspan, good rebounder. the questions were largely about his offense and how much value he would have as a playmaker, as a shooter. Typically in today's NBA, where speed and agility are at a premium and you really need your guards and wings to shoot, that often leads to a player like Tari sliding up a position or two, which, sure, it's still useful. But for the Rockets, at least as I see it, it was always sort of tricky because you're also trying to develop Jabari at power forward and Sengun at center. Where do the minutes come from? I saw Rahat Hawk or Red94 on Twitter tweet out that the organization has always adored Tari and believed in his production. And look, I can personally confirm that is 100% true. By their models, he was the best or second best rookie in the league last season, even ahead of Paolo Banchero, who was a runaway rookie of the year. But while the permanent production was always super encouraging, it wasn't like there was a clear path to scale it up more, since you also had to worry about developing Jabari and Sengun. But when you flash forward to today, this is what's super encouraging. Tari has largely been playing on the wing in the fourth quarter of these games, and he's actually finished this week in place of Jalen Green. Even though Tari's not really a big time shot creator yet, he's agile enough to still guard the athletic guards and wings, and he's now shooting 42% on threes. Even if that slides down to, let's say, the mid to upper 30s, that's easily good enough to still be viable when it comes to spacing. And the reason that's such a big deal, if you can realistically play Tari anywhere from 2 through 4, that opens up so many more possibilities to scale up his minutes. Jalen has been the guy that's underperformed this week, but next week it may be somebody else. What if Dylan Brooks has another game like the 1 for 12 shooting night he had against the Spurs? Or if he gets in bad foul trouble again like he did against Memphis? What if Jabari finally slumps? What if Sengun is hitting something of a wall after being leaned on very heavily early in the year? In that scenario, you could put Tari at the 4 and Jabari at the 5, where that aforementioned rebounding growth makes him so much more viable. Realistically, point guard with Fred VanVleet is the only position in the closing lineup that Tari Eason isn't capable of forcing his way into on a given night. And that's really important because most nights, at least one out of Jalen, Dylan, Jabari, and Sengun aren't going to be clicking. If they all are, you take that as a good problem to have. But most nights, there's going to be somebody who doesn't have it. And this way, Tari can get his starters minutes by taking just a few minutes here and there from several players. One night it might be Jalen, another it's Dylan, another it's Jabari or Sengun, as opposed to having to dramatically change one player's role for the whole season, which can potentially harm their development and their long-term place with the organization. So the fact that Tari is flashing not just as a player, but as a wing, that's massive when it comes to his utility to Ime Udoka, and it gives the Rockets so many more options. And as far as Tari's minutes, it takes away that ceiling that would otherwise be there if there wasn't a path into the closing lineup. If you can't close, you're probably going to be capped at about 25 minutes per game, simply because if you're competitive and the Rockets plan to be this year, those last 8 minutes or so in the fourth quarter are going to be earmarked for your main guys. But now there's a greater potential for Tari to absorb some of those minutes. And so now when we talk about him being great on a per minute basis, now you hopefully have a path to scaling that up to actual starter level production to where, who knows, maybe he becomes the best player on this year's team. I also think that when it comes to the 23 to 24 Rockets in particular, whether Tari plays as a wing or as a forward, his style of play is also super important to how this group fits together. A lot of our recent pods, we talked about the Rockets not really having a proven crunch time bucket getter. They're still trying to find the him, whether it's Jalen, Sengun, somebody else. And because of that, it often gets sticky late in close games, which is when you need somebody to make a play against tough physical defense in the half court. We saw that during the 18-0 run by Denver the other night, which almost took away that win. Well, the thing about Tari, he gets you what I call cheap buckets. Because of his relentless motor, he can easily beat guys on backdoor cuts. He can get offensive rebounds and putbacks. And just generally, he earns you second and third possessions. Even if it's not sexy, it makes it really hard for you to go through a super long drought. And if you combine that with the top 5 defense, you're going to be able to grind out a lot of games. Now, long term, who knows? It's not totally implausible that Tari could turn into a Kawhi Leonard or a Jimmy Butler. By that, I mean a jumbo wing type of player who starts as a strong defender and then generally is a role player on offense, but gradually develops over time as a playmaker and a scorer. Then one day he's suddenly a two-way star. It's not implausible. Again, there are previous examples, but those are outlier scenarios. For now, with a guy drafted number 17 overall, I'll be a bit conservative in these projections. Unless Tari gets to that level, you're probably still going to need someone from the Jalen Green / Amen Thompson / Cam Whitmore trio to break out as a true perimeter playmaker, top scorer, that type of player. Because if you don't have a top 5 defense, and it's tough to count on that every single year, you probably need more playmaking and scoring upside than what the current Rockets are showing. Speaking of Red 94, he had one other good tweet about Rafael Stone clearly hitting on 3 of his 6 young core picks from the last 3 drafts. That's referring to Tari, Jabari, and Sengun. Berhat is absolutely right, in my opinion. I think all 3 of those are going to be very good players on winning teams at a minimum. We've covered that ad nauseum on this podcast. But more than likely, as he also indicated, the Rockets need to hit on at least one more draft pick from the other 3, or if not, then trade for a player from outside the organization who can fill that playmaking / scoring role. But for this year, look, we're over a quarter of the way in, and I don't think, assuming health, there's any reason to assume a regression is coming. Their play is legitimate. Using this week as a template with the Tari in place of Jalen formula, it can absolutely work when the collective defense is this strong. And while it might limit your upside in a playoff series, there is some question, well, there's a significant question at this point as to what you can do from a half-court creation standpoint. I don't think the Rockets are really prioritizing the 2024 playoffs all that heavily anyway. It's about the longer-term blueprint. So the bottom line, and then I'll finally hand things off to Paolo, I think this Tari formula can 100% work for this season's team. And then, as with so many things, you can reevaluate where these players are next summer and modify your long-term blueprint as needed. The last point I want to make on this season's group, it's worth remembering that Tari didn't play at all in the first 2 weeks of this season, and he was basically below 20 minutes per game for the rest of November as they slowly built him back up after suffering the stress reaction in his leg during the preseason. So he's really only been a 25-plus minutes per game player for the last 10 days or so. So in the context of this year's team, as we chat this Friday, December 15th, think about that. The Rockets have long contended that on a per-minute basis, Tari is one of the best players on the team, if not the best. The question was where it made sense to allocate any additional minutes from. Now it's becoming increasingly clear how that can work. And as far as the record, look, the Rockets are 12-9, but there's a case to be made that the future could be even better. The point differential is 4th in the West, and we know several of those losses were very close, playing on the road versus good teams. And if Tari Eason is indeed one of your best players, consider that you either didn't have him at all or had a fairly limited version for the first month plus of the season. As good as it feels to be 12-9 after 3 years of hell, to me, there's potentially room to be even better should Tari Eason be this damn good. And from everything I can tell, he absolutely is. Paolo, what are your thoughts on Tari and what his recent play means for the formula, or I suppose the blueprint?
Yeah, man. Listen, to me, if you've followed me long enough, there's been very few things when it comes to the draft that I've been as sure about as I was with Tari. It's just he found, like, back at LSU, he was a 6th man. Like, he was the best rated prospect on that team, at least the one that was drafted the highest. And he found a way to impact the game immensely, and he was coming off the bench. And you could tell right away that even though he was slightly older of a prospect, I think he was 21 coming in, he's just, it's easy to compare him to Jabari because they play sort of a similar position, sort of a similar role coming into the league. You think of them as that role player that, is switchable on defense and can space the floor, the PJ, the variations of the PJ Tucker archetype. But Tari has always been, since the beginning, since I've watched him at LSU, way more developed at what I'm going to call like the soft skills for a player of that archetype, right? Most 3-and-D wings, we've talked about the plus sign after the 3-and-D wing, right? Before on this podcast. Tari has always been very developed. Like, he's always had a respectable handle. He's always had a little bit of a post game. Like, he is very coordinated on offense for a guy that's mostly a role player. He can drive, right? He can spin out of the post. He can hit some mid-range shots. He can shoot off the dribble some. We see that here and then when he plays in the G League, not in the G League, in Summer League. And we saw some of that at LSU. We see some of that when in off-season practice clips. Take those for what they're worth, right? So with him, the 3-and-D tag, when you're projecting him coming out of college, you're thinking, oh, maybe, these flashes that he shows of a handle, of a little bit of a post game, of that coordination, of those, just basketball player traits, like all around traits. You kind of, when you're protecting him to the NBA game, you're thinking, oh, that works in college. It probably doesn't work in the league. He'll probably strip down his game to just shooting threes and playing great defense, right? Truth is, other than the finishing last year, which was tough, which was rough, but it's gotten better this year. Those skills have, for the most part, translated, and the motor is still there. Which is why, if you give him enough minutes, and we saw this a little bit in his rookie season, if given enough minutes, he can go for 20 points a game just off of hustle plays and off of possessions where the offense is scrambling and he makes something work. Right? He has that ability, which I think we even talked about this on the last pod about Aaron Holiday. He has a little bit of that in between ability as well, which makes you think. And it's really hard to shake because he is so good right now already, and he was already last season, just not given as prominent of a role. Makes you think how you can project this to something more than a role player, right? Because it is he is more developed than what Kawhi was coming into the league. Kawhi was younger, obviously, so you can't really compare them, at the same stage of their careers because they came into the league differently. But Tari came into the league more developed in those things, and it really makes you think that on a team that is currently lacking, uh, not only a shot creator but just overall scoring. As you said, the team's lacking this, right? It's not like Jalen Green has been a great shot creator either, and I wonder if you give Tari, the 30 minutes a night, if he consistently over the course of a month would give you more points than Jalen Green would.
Yeah, I wonder that too.
Just off of those putbacks and those scramble possessions, which makes you think. Listen, he's switchable enough to play the two, even if he isn't. Even if you don't think he is, you can have Dylan Brooks play the two, and it's a really interesting thing because this happens in a lot of rebuilds. There's always guys that are projected to be really good and then underperform. And there's always guys who are projected to be just something, and they become something else. With the Thunder, you can look at Jalen Williams, right? I don't think anybody predicted him to be that good, and well, he is, and he's, I think out of the draft, people would have expected him to be maybe a sixth man, maybe more of a role player, and we see the ceilings through the roof. So with Tari, listen, you're not gonna find people out there higher on Tari than I am. I think he has tremendous on-ball potential defensively. I think he's showing this year an ability to play weak side defense and rim protect. That's absolutely insane. I think he's 99th percentile in rim protection for his position and for his size, which is, for a second-year player, is insane. So he has all the defensive potential. Offensively, he has the motor, right? So he'll contribute even if he's not Jimmy Butler, Kawhi Leonard type. And he shows little flashes here and there of those, more connector skills that you can see, if honed enough, could turn him into that sort of player, which poses a really interesting question as far as minutes goes. I think eventually, Rohat has had a great point. Listen, if you hit on your entire front court, you already have a pretty good basis to go and get someone else. And I know we won't get into trades. That's something for next spot. But as far as Tari goes, it's quite like Sengun. Anytime he's been given a chance, or not given a chance, he's always had a chance. But anytime he's given a more prominent role, he seems to deliver. And his per 36 numbers have always been great. And it's always given off the sense that when you increase the role, the per 36 numbers, while not entirely accurate, his impact scales with more minutes as well. It's kind of weird that we as a fan base have kind of not slept on it because we've always known that Tari was really good, but because he was hurt for the beginning of the season, it was and we were playing so well, it was hard to imagine how Tari can come in and contribute to winning and improve this team up like a lot more, right? And so just to touch on Jabari as well, I think I've never seen a player fluctuate so much between brilliant and awful as Jabari does based on his confidence and how the team's going. Like right now, he's looking like everything you expected him to be, and you can see you can see the defense, you can see the rebounding, you can see him, forcing himself onto opponents. We saw him drive on Wemby. We're seeing him be more physical on drives. We had, of course, the vibes are immaculate. The interview from Tari Eason and in the locker room to him, with the "Are you on your bully season?" and that was hilarious.
Clutch
But
City
with
acquired.
Jabari, it's very much that. And when he plays like this, you're thinking, "Oh my God, this is the guy that we thought could switch 1 through 5. This is the guy that we thought could space the floor and be really useful." If he's grabbing rebounds, that's another facet to his game. And now we're seeing the potential of him, driving to the rim. We're seeing the post potential, and now we start to see, what the star potential could look like with him. And it's about, I think, as I said, I think he's a really emotional player. I don't think we could have gotten a better coach in Ime Udoka to get him to reach that potential. And he plays no small part in the success the Rockets are having. But, you know, I think it's incredible that we just see these huge fluctuations where it seems like on any given night a different player steps up for this team. Sometimes Dylan Brooks goes off for 20, and it's easy for offensively for one player popping off being enough because the defense is so good. So Dylan Brooks going off for 20, and if everybody else maintains, 90% of their usual production, is enough for us to win the game because we don't need to score that much. Dylan Brooks can go off for 20. Tari Eason can go off for 20. Jabari Smith can go off. Fred VanVleet can have a really hot shooting game and carry this team. Alperen Sengun has been the most consistent player offensively so far, and he is the one that's been keeping us in games. It's really exciting, and I think I kind of get flustered a little bit because it really just makes me so happy to watch us play competitive basketball again and have, bright spots and to come on here and to talk about the games and to think, hey, listen, we went through some really rough times. And it's really good that, basically every player, sadly apart from Jalen, has given us reason to be optimistic about the future. And listen, I guess I'll finish my rant on I'll tell you the one secret, just to end off on a funnier note. The one secret that sportsbooks don't want you to know. Whenever the Rockets, go from winning to losing, right? If they win a game and then they lose the game, you can always bet on them losing the next game. Or if they lose a game and then win a game, you can always bet on them winning the next game. It's actually insane that we haven't had a single stretch of games this season that wasn't like a streak. We go on, 3 game, let's look at the schedule. We started off with 3 losses, then we went on to 6 wins, then 3 losses, then 2 wins, then 3 losses, now 4 wins. And we're like extremely streaky. But yeah, I've gone off on a tangent here, but
No, it's a wild ride
it's,
for sure,
you
and
know,
it makes sense with such a young team.
it's just a really exciting time to be a Rockets fan right now.
Let me ask you one follow-up as it pertains to the Tari versus Jalen conundrum in particular. We've cited Rahat's information a few times, and for those who don't know, again, he's Red94 on Twitter, but Rahat is a legendary voice in the Rockets media community. He's blogged about them for the past 10, 15 years for certainly Forbes, but before that, the Houston Chronicle, ESPN. He's got connections. His info is real. I've heard many of the same things. And I think it's safe to say right now that the Rockets feel better, at least about the floor of Tari Eason than they do Jalen Green. And I think that's played into particularly this week. Why, when things got a little hairy and closer than they would have liked in the second half against the Spurs and the Grizzlies. Now, granted, they still won those games by double digits, but Tari is something like a security blanket. You know what you're going to get from him. As opposed to Jalen, there's a lot of volatility depending on whether the shot is going in on a given night. Because if it's not like he's bringing you a ton of value defensively or in other areas of the game. Now, I'm not ready to say that the Rockets clearly have Tari a tier ahead of Jalen simply because, again, I do think there's a ceiling with Jalen that at 21 years old, we cannot dismiss. There's a reason he was drafted number 2 overall in a strong draft. But I do think that when you're entering year 2, year 3, you do have to start to think about the floor scenarios as well. And with Tari, there is some security. And I have seen some talk already. Is there a point in which you would consider starting Tari in place of Jalen? To me, the answer is not for the foreseeable future. And unless things go seriously off the rails, I would not really look at that until this offseason. For starters, right now, you're winning. So why change what's working? You've won 4 games in a row, 11 straight at home, and Ime has shown a willingness to be flexible in his closing lineups anyway. So if you're not married to using your starters as your closers, what does it really matter who plays the first 6 minutes of the first and third quarters? To me, the downside risk just isn't worth it as long as the team has a baseline level of competency, because Jalen would certainly take that as a hit being pulled from the starting lineup in terms of his value around the league. It would look like you're buying into the 6-man narrative. So to me, unless things go really off the rails and you lose 8 to 10 games in a row and Jalen is just playing ridiculously horrible for a sustained basis, not just 2 or 3 games, then he bounces back with a couple of really good games, which has been sort of the theme of his inconsistent season to date. To me, unless there's something drastic like that, you play the season out as it is, and then you take stock of where you're at next summer. And maybe that's making a change internally and leaning into the Tari lineups even more. Maybe that's making a splash trade externally. We'll see what happens with, Donovan Mitchell is someone that I'm keeping an eye on as far as a big name shooting guard that might move depending on what happens this season with Cleveland. Can they get over the hump? It's not that difficult. I talked about that before, to find a player of that archetype on the market if you need it. So even if it's not Tari, if it's someone else, you know, this summer they could potentially use that Brooklyn stockpile of draft assets to pursue that type of player. But to me, unless things go really off the rails this year, I don't really see a reason to revisit the starting lineup. There's a clear path for you to get Tari starters minutes as it is. They're already starting to do that. So to me, unless something goes catastrophically wrong for an extended period, you just stick with the status quo for this year. Then you reevaluate your prospects after the season and make the harder decisions at that time. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, yeah, I think it does. I think it ties into something that I've said previously on the pod, which is we are doing really well, but then let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? We're basically playing with house money, and even if it sacrifices, a couple of wins, whatever I talked about, I think it was a 20-80 split or whatever it was. Some of it should still be invested into development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, you moving Jalen to the bench at least this early on, to me, it's gonna hit it, like it's gonna be really bad on his confidence.
Agree.
It's gonna feel a little bit like we're giving up on him, even though I'm all for accountability, right? And it's going to sound a little soft, but some players are like that. And the Rockets have too much invested into Jalen to give up this early, even though it's not exactly giving up. I think it would be a massive hit on his confidence. It wouldn't help. But, I think I'm not sure I'd hold until the end of the season, but I think at the All-Star break, I'll think about it. I think that's one of those arbitrary,
Well, and
breaks where you get a mental reset. And
you
if
also
he's
have
not,
10 days off, so you have several practices that you could actually go through a change like that and it not be on the fly. You could actually prepare. It's a rare time that you could do it without having to compromise a game or two because you're still sorting out what the new rotations look like.
yeah, and I think you can go to jail and you can talk to them about it at the beginning of the All-Star break, at the beginning of those 10 days. And you can say, listen, man, you're not playing good enough. This is a meritocracy now, and we gave you some leeway, but you're not playing good enough. And this isn't a permanent decision. If you play well enough, you can always go back to the starting lineup. But listen, it's what's best for the team. This is not a rebuilding team, this isn't a full-on rebuilding team anymore. So I think that's what would make sense. And listen, I think if we're using this transition into talking about Kellen and Sengun, man, they are kind of tied together. And these are
They're the year 3 guys, they're the starting points, and they're also the guys who you would expect to be the closest to a finished product amongst your young core. Not actually a finished product, let's not get crazy, but by year 3, you expect to see them turning into something at least close, at least showing flashes of what they could be 2-3 years from now when they actually are at what should be their peak.
Yeah, and not only that, that's obviously true, but what I was going with it is they're both players who are mostly offensive focused. That when things aren't going well, and obviously for Sengun this happens way less because things go well for him a lot more than Jalen, at least this year. They kind of hang their head and they're not, they don't try as hard on defense. And we saw that particularly in the Grizzlies game. Listen, we are a great defense, and 104 points is not a lot to give up. But this is a team that basically only has Jaren Jackson Jr. as a competent starter, and they have basically like six key players out or rotation players out, and we shouldn't be giving up 104 points to them. I set the goal at the beginning of the game. I set the goal at like 80 or 90 because we held the Spurs to, I think, 90 points, or I don't have it in front of me.
82.
We held, yeah, 82. So the thing is, with Sengun, he's so good offensively, and this team needs the offense so much, and that he's passable enough defensively that it works out.
Yeah.
With Jalen,
Well,
it's
one thing I was going to say to sort of distinguish between the two with Sengun, and again, the sample is so small of him playing below his usual form. We're really talking about just the last 2 or 3 games. I tend to think it's just a slump that any player goes through, or perhaps there's some conditioning issues. We know the Rockets have worried about that at times in his career, and they did have to lean on him a ton early in the season, especially when Tari either wasn't available or was very limited, and Jabari wasn't what he is now. I think All-P is going to bounce back. And I think a lot of what happened on defense with All-P, the shots inside didn't go the way he expects them to. He missed some bunnies. And I'm right there with you. You could see it taking a toll. Ime Udoka said this post game that you could read it on All-P's face. And I noticed it from the stands. He just was not rotating. He was sulking, and that's why he didn't play in the fourth quarter. With Jalen, there's elements of that, but honestly, that's the weird thing to me about Jalen's season. And I just want to make this distinction while we're talking about them. Of course, we led off the pod talking about the good, largely Tari Eason and Jabari Smith. Now we're talking about the not so good, Jalen and Sengun, at least over the past week. With Jalen, I actually think his attitude has been okay. Like, he's been a decent passer. He's continued to attack the rim. He's defended. I don't want to say he's a great defender, but he at least gives effort in one-on-one situations. It's not like he's not trying. With Jalen, it's just not enough shots are going in the basket. And so it's one of those things, he and Sengun probably share some typical young player habits. Not everybody's going to be the dog that Tari Eason is, as he explained post-game. And I think we know Jabari Smith Jr. is as well. I think Jalen and Sengun's personalities are more typical for young players in the NBA, and there's certain habits they both need to ease out over the years. But I just think that, with Sengun, it's just that in most games, the last 2 or 3 notwithstanding, he does so many good things in so many areas that you don't even notice. They don't even matter. The little bad habits that I suppose they're trying to shake under Ime Udoka. Whereas with Jalen, I don't know. He has some of those habits, but I do think at least from a year ago, there's progress. He's trying. His attitude seems to be good. It's just he's not making enough shots. He's just not good enough as a player. I know this is sort of simple analysis. He's not good enough, but that's what it seems like to me. I mean, there's frustrating things with All-P, but he's good enough as a player that at the end of the day, you feel confident he's going to provide enough value to be very, very good, and you know how he's going to fit long term in your blueprint. With Jalen, none of these little things are all that major of an indictment, but he's just not consistently good enough at anything to overcome them, right?
Yeah, it's it's interesting because he got better, a lot better at the things he was bad at, but he got worse, or at least didn't get better at the things he's good at, which is the scoring. Like, and at this point, it looks really bad on basically all fronts. He cannot catch and shoot. He's still struggling to finish at the rim. The progress we thought we saw getting to the line seems to be gone. Sometimes he does it, sometimes he doesn't. He still seems contact averse when driving to the rim. The mid-range game is completely gone, or at least it's not hitting. And it's oh man, listen, dude. It's just sad, right? And it's, to me, it's tough with Jalen. It's tough to take the emotion out of it because this is the guy that we started the rebuild with. This is the first cornerstone, right? And it's
Right.
it's just disappointing that he struggled. And I don't even really know where you go from here. I said till the end of the season, you just hope that he gets better, because he's, you'll be selling low if you traded him. You'd be selling too quick if you traded him. If you decrease his role, he might get, bummed out. Not bummed out is not the correct wording. I'm struggling with the words here.
I know what you mean.
But he probably hurt his confidence, which is something that you don't want to do to your scorer. And it's just tough to keep coming up with ways to not to justify it, but to keep it going. And I think at this point, all you can do is you ride it out until the end of the season and you make a decision then. I think, as I said, you're playing with house money this season, right? So you can afford to, experiment and see what you've got with him. And the bright side is, at the same time, listen, Cam Whitmore's looking like a star in the league. I know that's not hard to do. Jalen did it as well. But while it's not exactly the same, it's somewhat of the same archetype. And you could see him giving him a chance in case the Rockets don't find the correct trade partner to go get a star.
And by the way, man, one thing in defensive Jalen that you can point out, we've talked about some of the similar archetypes to Jalen taking into year 4, year 5, year 6 to fully break out. I think one thing that's unfair to him, there's been a lot made of the potential for a contract offseason next summer. And so that constant referendum has played a role in the way people evaluate him. They want clarity on what's he going to be worth, should you offer him the max or anything close to that. We should really emphasize that you do not have to give a contract extension to a player coming off their 3rd season. There's really not a ton of downside to waiting until after their 4th season, because they will be restricted free agents. You can match any outside offer. So there really isn't a ton of downside. If the Rockets just play this out, and there's a lot of people it feels like they have to have clarity on Jalen this season one way or another. And the reality, if he breaks out in year 4 instead of year 3, it's not really that big of a deal. You easily can retain him after year 4. He'd most likely still want to be here, even if for some reason he doesn't. You have matching rights because he'd be a restricted free agent. So I just want to emphasize, like, in an absolutely perfect world, would you have clarity on Green and Sengun after year 3 and sign them to max or near max deals for 4 or 5 years? Of course, that's the ideal scenario. They both look like superstars coming out of the 3rd year. But that's the ideal scenario. You do not have to have that. And so I think, at least for some people, that misunderstanding is leading some people to sort of push for a referendum earlier than they have to.
Since we're talking about kind of the bad, even though what I'm going to talk about is not the bad, but it's been called by some people as the bad, I want to talk a little bit about Fred VanVleet, because it seems, I didn't notice this at first, but it seems like he's been a pretty divisive topic to a segment of at least what we see on Rockets Twitter, which is our pulse of the fan base. It's the biggest community, I would say, online. I see a lot of people talking about, oh, he can only, make a certain type of pass. He can't hit the corners. He's bad at throwing lobs. I hear it, and I kind of think about listen, I'm getting better at my football analogies. You know how people call quarterbacks who have great weapons glorified game managers, or whatever they call it? I think that's the
right.
wording.
No, that's right.
And I get the feeling that people are doing a little bit of the same thing with Fred VanVleet, where they're expecting it, because he's making so much money, they're expecting him to be, this transcending player. And they're forgetting that, listen, he's getting paid a lot of money because he fits perfectly what we needed, because we had money to spend, and because we paid extra for the contract to not have too many years on it, because we want to be flexible, right? And he still brings what we want him to bring. Yes, the shot selection is a little rough, but it's because the shot selection is rough that teams respect him, and the screening actions with Sengun work. Because we saw the same screening actions with Kevin Porter Jr. last year with Sengun, and they don't work because either people don't respect his shot, or people didn't respect him to make the correct decision out of the pick and roll, or to be snappy enough with his decision making. Fred VanVleet may not be the most efficient player in the world. He isn't. But the fact that he shoots those shots and makes, at least the threes at a good enough rate, makes it so teams will try to limit that shot, and that's how he can, leverage that to make other decisions. Defensively, he's great defensively. He has great hands. He makes a lot of stuff happen. He's physical. He usually makes the correct decision on rotations, and then he's a leader on the floor, right? So you can complain that he's not efficient. You can complain that he can't make all of the passes, but he came in to play a certain role that was severely lacking on this team, that was severely lacking on the free agency market. And yes, he's not perfect. Yes, he has loopholes, even in his passing game, which is supposed to be, his calling card. But he doesn't turn the ball over, which is a massive deal for us, especially for a team that's already bad on offense, that's hanging their hat on defense. Well, one of the great ways of improving your defense is not turning the ball over, because playing transition defense, you're automatically at a disadvantage versus in half court where the offense is trying to create an advantage. And it kind of triggers me a little bit to hear people talk about Fred VanVleet, even though, I didn't love the signing at first, right? And before, if you go back to my tweets during the last season, I wasn't really a fan. But at this point, first of all, you can argue with the results. Second of all, you can't go from a team that wins 20 games to all of a sudden having the expectation that every single player has to be the best version of themselves, and every single player, is not going to make mistakes, and we're going to play contender level basketball where you're nitpicking every little thing. He's good enough for what we need. He's perfect for what we need out of a point guard. It's not like we had our pick of the litter when it comes to we couldn't go out there and get prime Chris Paul that's gonna make every read. And so I don't know. I think it's crazy to me to say that VanVleet has not been anything other than a great success for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed that counterculture too on Twitter in particular, and I think it's grasping at straws. I don't think it's a coincidence that at least some of the people I've seen pushing that were either Steven Silas proponents or people who were trying to minimize his role in last year's shortcomings. And so, because of that, there's, I think, sort of a tendency to downplay just how far this team has come and focus on their shortcomings. And sure, you can point to, they let the Lakers game and maybe the Dallas game slip away, but this is just phenomenal year-on-year growth. And anyone who doesn't see it is missing the forest for the trees. Yeah, you can look at that point differential and say that they're lagging a little bit. But again, as we've talked about in the past, these fourth quarter execution issues were just sort of an occupational hazard with the way this roster put together and the emphasis they put on, leadership and culture in the offseason rather than the proven half court bucket getter for late in close games. The other thing I think is a factor, the last few years, the Rockets have been so bad that I think a lot of fans have just looked at the basic surface level stats because they made us feel better. We could say that Kevin Porter Jr. was averaging close to 26 and 6, or Jalen Green was averaging 22 points a game. He's a bucket. He had this streak of 30-point games or whatever, and he was, I think, the leading scorer of his draft class in year 2. The under the hood numbers were never very pretty. It's just we didn't want to look at them. We knew the team was bad. And so if we could, screenshot that StatMuse lead image and say, look, this guy has some statistics that everybody knows: points, rebounds, assists, shooting percentage. I guess true shooting percentage is becoming more standardized. Then we can feel better about ourselves. And so Fred in those categories, doesn't stand out. He is shooting respectable 37.5% from three, but he's below 38% overall shooting. We know that generally he doesn't have the explosion near the rim. So when he probes, he's looking to kick it out. And when he tries to finish, that lack of height and explosion makes it more difficult. All of that's fair, but there are other ways, better ways to look at the game. We just haven't, as Rockets fans, looked at them as much. At least some fans haven't since the James Harden era, because we haven't had a reason to care about wins and losses. We knew they weren't going to win. When you actually look at the under the hood numbers, look, net rating, Fred is second on the team behind only Tari Eason in on-off differential. And if you exclude Tari, because he has the smallest sample by far for reasons we discussed earlier, Fred leads the entire team, almost doubling Alperen and Sengun, who has had a heck of a season. When you look at win shares for 48 minutes, box score plus minus, value over replacement player. He's almost perfectly in line with his peak Toronto seasons. So there's a lot of good he's doing. And that's before we get into the value of his leadership, his presence, what he means on the practice court, in the huddles, during timeouts, his guidance in the locker room, and so on and so forth. When you look at, when we're talking on court production, the under the hood numbers, when you get beyond the surface level points, rebounds, assists, and percentages and get into some of the advanced metrics that show how the team functions with Fred on the court and when he's not on the court, he's still making the same impact that he did in Toronto. It is clear. And I think there's a lot of people that because of, previous positions they held with either Stephen Silas or maybe Kevin Porter Jr., they look at those same basic level stats and don't want to give credit where credit's due. But if you look under the hood, it's there. I mean, the team results should speak for themselves. The team that was last in the Western Conference for 3 years being 12-9 and on pace to win, as mentioned earlier, more than 47 wins as things currently stand. That's a phenomenal uptick, and Fred, as your flagship offseason signing, has had a ton to do with that. But I also think the statistics themselves, the people that are sort of crapping on him, you're just looking at very basic, rudimentary stuff. When you actually peel back the curtain and you look deeper, it's pretty clear that Fred has had a major impact on this team, and to this point, I'm absolutely thrilled with his performance, and it sounds like you are as well.
Yeah, it's. I think I defined. To me, the consistency is a really big point. To me, the not turning the ball over and making the correct decisions for the most part. Right, he's not going to see every corner pass, but for the most part, he's not going to attempt anything overly flashy either, and let the other team go on a massive run. When teams really good defensively, as I said, you want that consistency, and the numbers right now look worse than they did earlier in the season because he's had a couple of games that, to his standard, are not that great, but to anybody else in the league would be. I mean, he had 9 assists to 3 turnovers last game, and that's considered a bad game for him, playmaking wise. For anybody in the league, a 3.0 assist to turnover ratio, especially at that volume, is great. But he's getting 8.6 assists to 1.8 turnovers. It's an over 4, just off the top of my head, over 4 assist turnover ratio.
Assist rate is easily the highest of his career.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we wanted, right? We have, in theory, we have Jalen Green, who's supposed to be playing better, and we have Alperen, Sengun, and even Tari Smith, if we want to tap into that, to go be the scorers. What we wanted was a game manager. We wanted someone who could space the floor and play off ball in case someone blows up, and Fred doesn't have to take as much of the load, which is still possible. We wanted someone who's able to play defense. We wanted someone who's able to show leadership. These were the 3 main things that we need: the game manager, space the floor, be a leader. I think Fred VanVleet is a 10 out of 10, or I'll call it a 9 out of 10 because there's always someone better, but I'd say he's a 9 out of 10 at all 3 of those things. And so he fits like a glove into what the Rockets needed. And in games we lose, you're going to look at the box score and you're going to see that he went, 6 for 16, and like 10 of those shots are threes. And you're going to say, oh, he's, a big part of the reason we lost. When for the most part, he's probably going to be a part of the reason we were in the game in the first place. And as he is for most of these games, I think we're kind of losing sight of at how important the point guard position is, at how important ball security is. We've been through 3 years where that was a massive issue, and how hard it is to find that skill set around the league, especially in free agency, which was what if you draft a guy, those guys are really hard to find in the draft. I mean, Cade Cunningham was a generational point guard prospect. He struggles with turnovers, he struggles with ball security, he struggles with shooting. Even in the draft, it's really hard to find that. And then besides the draft, you got trades and you got free agency, and the Rockets aren't exactly in a position to go ahead and go make trades for guys that fit, unless it's a massive star trade, because we don't really have the expendable assets. We kind of have enough to make a star trade, and if we start cutting off pieces of our asset pile to go fill these needs, it'd be different. So we were basically limited. We had this massive amount of cap space, and so that's where we needed to go and get someone to fill that role. And that's that's the perspective you have to go and look at it from when analyzing Fred VanVleet as a signing, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. He's not making $43 million a year because he's a super max player. No, there's a lot of circumstances that go into it, and I think he's been terrific. And I mean, as I said before, I mean, I'm overjoyed with how the team's playing. I'm overjoyed with how this season's going, making the leap from 20 wins to what is a 45 win pace at this
47
point.
win pace.
47 win pace at this point. It's like, even if we go down to 40, that's a 20 win improvement. I don't think it's unheard of, but it's pretty close to it. And we came from 3 years where everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong.
Yeah.
On the court. And I'm just blessed that we're looking at the season and like, we're overperforming expectations. People are starting to respect this team again. They're fun to watch again, as frustrating as the offense can be at times. It's, we are already being spoiled and making a leap way bigger than anybody expected.
Absolutely.
Let's respect that it is still supposed to take a couple, 2 or 3 years for us to get from where we were to absolute contention. So we don't need to be nitpicking every little thing right now. It's going to be a process. And listen, if you need a silver lining, if you somehow still are not convinced that Fred VanVleet's been a great addition, think about it this way. As he's also a guy that, as other players get better around him, his role can be scaled down, and
Bingo.
he'll take less of those shots in next year or the year afterwards if we are making that progress. So it's not. I just think he's been like a really good signing. He and Dylan Brooks, but I won't get into it. And it really puzzles me that we're looking at this. We've made the switch too quickly from this team's god awful worst in the league for 3 years to holding them to the standard that you'd hold someone on the Denver Nuggets.
Absolutely. And we saw signs of this over the past 2 games. Early in the Memphis game, they were clearly making more of an effort to initiate offense through Jalen Green. And I thought, if you go back and look at the first 5, 6 minutes, it gets back into what I was saying earlier. I think he actually made a lot of the right reads and decisions. He just didn't make the shots. He didn't finish his drives. And so eventually the Rockets went away from it just because he was missing too many shots. But the point is that Fred's presence allows you to do different things with Jalen. If you had, for example, a more ball dominant point guard like a James Harden or a Kyrie Irving, other guys you could have conceivably signed in last summer's free agency, I don't think you're going to be playing them off the ball to let Jalen start on ball in an effort to get him going. Now, it didn't work, but it was worthwhile for reasons we've outlined a ton. You want to do everything you can to help Jalen succeed, and they tried that against Memphis. On Monday against the Spurs, when Amen Thompson came back, there were stretches in that second quarter in particular where Fred came in as an off-ball option while letting Amen run the offense and serve as the primary ball handler and facilitator. That's part of why you signed him, that utility, the ability to use him in different ways. And the last point I want to get to on Fred, his win shares for 48 minutes, his best since 2020 and 2018, third best of his entire NBA career. So I don't know what you were expecting if you're disappointed by Fred. The team's success has clearly been everything and then some that anyone could have reasonably hoped for. Fred, once you get past the very basic stats and you make any effort at all to look at actual numbers within a team construct and how they affect winning basketball, Fred is a winning player. He's a leader. I do not get this counterculture, and I think some of it is people who had pre-existing narratives, be it Silas, KPJ. I've seen some of it from the James Harden supporters as well. Just people that, are looking for a reason to justify previous agendas as opposed to, taking an honest look at this team and its situation, which Fred, as its leader, has had a huge role in the success they've had to this point. All right, as we wind down the pod, we've talked a little bit about the good, the bad, then the good again with Fred VanVleet. You're going to need good from a lot of different areas over the next couple of weeks because the schedule is going to get very dicey. We've talked a lot about the Rockets playing the fewest games in the NBA to date and all the weird stretches to begin the year of 3 or 4 days without a game. That's about to change in a big way. Over the next 12 days, the Rockets actually have 3 back-to-backs. So 6 of their next 7 games overall, or 6 of their next 8, excuse me, will be in back-to-back settings. Milwaukee and Cleveland, both on the road on 17th and 18th of December. Dallas at home and New Orleans on the road on the 22nd and 23rd. And then Indiana and Phoenix both at home on the 26th and 27th, right after Christmas. So the Rockets are going to need contributions up and down the roster. The good news, Ime Udoka seems to be making a concerted effort to have a very deep rotation. This is not Mike D'Antoni ball. We saw Wednesday night, even with Amin Thompson out with an illness that's been going around the locker room in recent days, they played 11 players. Now, I suppose you can put an asterisk on the 10 minutes that Jock Landale played because those were primarily in the first half. Jeff Green was not with the team to start the game, personal reasons, but he was available by the second half and actually stepped up and had a key role in them bouncing back from a bad third quarter and taking it control down the stretch of the fourth, winning at 35-23 to secure a 13-point win. We talked about Tari Eason, 25 and 14. He was obviously the star player, but Jeff Green had a key role, 9 points on 3 of 3 shooting, also drew 3 free throws, made all of them. So Jeff played a key role, and I would say he's clearly your backup center at this point over Jock Landale. But what I thought was interesting is that with the men out, it would have been so easy to go to a 9-man rotation. No, they actually put in Reggie Bullock in the first half, and he made a couple of threes. And Reggie effectively played minutes that would have gone to him at least in the first half. Second half, it was so close that the Rockets leaned a little bit more on the proven guys. They let Tari basically finish the game because they knew that this was a game that they needed to win. The schedule is going to get more difficult. You look next week, that back-to-back against Cleveland and Milwaukee is particularly difficult. So you don't want to let a home game against Memphis slip away. And to the Rockets' credit, they did not, even if it required benching Alperen, Sengun, and Jalen Green in the fourth quarter. But I just think playing 10 guys, we wondered when Amin comes back, are you going to see less minutes for Jae'Sean Tate, Aaron Holiday? To this point, it hasn't really happened. Honestly, you've seen less minutes from guys like Jalen and All-P because the bench guys play at a capable enough level that if your starters don't have it, and especially if they're letting the struggles on offense affect what they give you defensively, the odds are one of these defensive oriented types off the bench may provide you with more overall value. We're talking about a Jae'Sean Tate or an Aaron Holiday or even a rookie Amin Thompson. I know he's just 20 years old, but the Rockets really believe in his defensive versatility, what he can give them on that end of the floor. So to me, when you look at the schedule ahead and what to expect and sort of themes, for me, this is where I think Ime's insistence on keeping a lot of guys ready and not giving up on, say, a Reggie Bullock could really pay off, because it would not surprise me if, we saw in Denver on night 2 of a back-to-back in late November, they gave Fred the night off. The Rockets might give Tari Eason a night off because he's still been listed as questionable with the lower leg injury, that stress reaction. I know they're still monitoring it the last couple of games. There's all sorts of guys who may need a breather when we're talking about all of these back-to-backs, especially within a 2-week span. So to me, this is where not giving up on a Reggie Bullock or a Jae'Sean Tate and Aaron Holiday, even a Jock Landale to some extent, that could pay dividends, because we're really going to go through a difficult period with the schedule. The Rockets, and I don't know, maybe it's not all bad, because to this point, it feels like the Rockets and Jalen Green in particular have been worse when they've had a ton of rest. It's sort of the rest versus rust debate. So maybe this constant string of games can get these guys in rhythm. That's the hope. But I also think that, more practically, at some point it is going to take a toll over that difficult 12-day stretch from the 15th to the 27th. And besides the obvious, it's good that Ime is keeping his veterans ready, because this is the time you may have to finally lean on them. I think this is going to be a key stretch for Amin Thompson. He should have the freshest legs after having 5+ weeks off. And now, he got another few days off because of the illness. My bet is that Fred and Aaron, given their veteran status and the load they're asked to carry as point guards, are guys who may have the most reductions when it comes to either a game off or a few minutes off here or there. So Amin, as a guy that can play a lot of positions, that can handle the ball, that can defend capably, that has the freshest legs, to me, this next stretch of games, this is where Amin, and hopefully he gets well. He's not hurt. It's not the ankle. It's just an illness. But assuming he gets well, To me, this could be the stretch where Amen Thompson has a real impact. I like what we saw from him against the Spurs. He seemed much more calm. He didn't seem to have the nerves with regards to his handle or decision making like we saw the first 3.5 games of the year before the ankle sprain. So to me, in terms of themes moving forward, of course, you want to see more consistency from Jalen. You want to see Alperen Sengun bounce back. You want to see Tari build on what he's doing. All that's obvious, and we've been talking about it the entire pod. In terms of anything new, the things to watch for me, the veterans that Ime is making sure are fresh. I think he and not entirely out of rhythm. You're going to have to lean on them a bit. And then Amen Thompson, to me, this is the part of the schedule where he's going to have an opportunity to step up. I think he's ready starting Friday night in Memphis, but especially Sunday in Milwaukee is when we'll get a chance to hopefully see that. Paolo, anything you're looking for as far as this upcoming stretch?
Yeah, just to get out of the way the fact that it's ridiculous that we had like 3 games in 12 days and now we have 3 back-to-back.
Right.
So 3
this is where the
back-to-backs.
schedule evens out and you get the schedule
Yeah.
closer to parity with the rest of the teams. But yeah, it's dumb.
It's both bad and it's also an opportunity. I think we are a young team, so above everything, we should be able to like catch a rhythm and not get too tired because of how young our players are and how used they are to playing heavy minutes. It's an opportunity because we have the same amount of losses as the 4 seed, right? And so if we go on a run, if we get hot, we could be looking really good a quarter of the way through the season. And then besides that, I think because Ime Udoka is so fluid with his rotation and he plays who's playing well, and because our offense is not too heliocentric around any one player, it makes it so we can rest guys. And since our identity is defensively, we can maintain that our identity. It's not a James Harden type of situation where if you don't have James Harden, well, what's going to happen to this team on offense? And so I think, as you said, a great point is Amen Thompson can slide across a multitude of positions. I think the main guy that you have to not worry, but you hope can handle it is Sengun because he's the most important player on this team.
And he has had issues with stamina in the past.
He's had issues with stamina in the past,
and some of the downturn recently, as we've talked about, you do worry, did they lean on him a bit too much early on? So yeah, that's a fair concern.
Yeah, and well, the replacements are not good. Jeff Green's good, but he's 36. He's not going to be able to play started minutes most likely.
Well, this is where to go back full circle to where we started the pod. I think Jabari's rebounding surge and the fact that he's playing tougher near the rim now. If Sengun is showing any signs of wear and tear over all these games in a short sample, to me, you really need to start trying Jabari at the 5 a bit more. We already saw them lean into that a bit the last couple of games. But to me, that's the answer because Jock Landale still looks terrible. If there's any hope that he's rounding into form, I haven't seen it. So yeah, if you're worried about Sengun, to me, Jabari at the 5 is the best hedge for that.
How long until his head grows back, dude? Listen, it's also actually I have another counter. I know I pushed back when you said Jabari at the 5 the first time around. I have another counter. I actually think better than Jabari at the 5 would actually be Tari Eason at the 5.
Well, either way, but yeah, the Tari Jabari front court. But yeah,
because of the I think
wingspan.
Because of not only because of the wingspan, because of the stat I cited about Tari Eason's rim protection for this position.
Oh yeah.
And we've seen him, have good instincts weak side, and when moving right, when defending pick and roll and moving, I trust Tari Eason's lower base more to be able to contain drives than Jabari, who's probably what's happened when he's been put in that position for the most part in the few reps that he's gotten, is the driver will get into his chest and draw a foul or finish through him most of the time. So, whether they go to that or not, they're interchangeable. But yeah, it's my main overarching point. It's a big opportunity for us to kind of see if we are, a playoff lock. By that I mean a top 6 seed, or a team that's going to be fighting for a top 6 seed, or a team that's going to be with the Golden States of the world and currently the Phoenix Suns of the world, fighting for better positioning within the play-in tournament. And I think listen, this is as good of an indictment as it could possibly be. I think our floor is the 10th seed. So what we thought was, our ceiling, which was making the play-in tournament, I think is our floor right now. By the way we're playing, barring any massive injuries, I think that's our floor.
Yeah.
I'm
We
just
should
waiting.
note that in the standings, look, if you can win this game Friday night at Memphis, you'll have 9 games of separation in the loss column between the Rockets and the Grizzlies. I know they'll get better when Ja Morant comes back next week, but that's a ton to make up. And they're not the same team as last year. They obviously lost Dylan Brooks to the Rockets. They have a number of injuries, Brandon Clark, Marcus Smart among them. That's a lot to ask. And then you have the Jazz, the Trailblazers, and the Spurs who are all tanking. So really, like, there's a clear top 11, and now the Warriors are 3 games below 500 and are without Draymond indefinitely. So yeah, like I would say it's 11 is the absolute worst case that I can see. It's just really tough to see the Rockets. They're going to be better than the Spurs, the Blazers, or the Jazz just because they're actually trying. And then the Grizzlies, even if they get better with Morant, there's just too much of a buffer. So yeah, as crazy as it sounds, given the limited expectations we had going into the year, boy, you're quickly getting to a point where like the 10 or 11 is probably the floor, the realistic floor, that is.
Yeah, and so just going forward, it's once again it's going to be hinging on, I think, how Jalen Green can play. Because if he's playing really well and he can get through 10 games of putting up an efficient 20 to 22 points a game, it eases the load so much more on your ability to rest guys, because we
For
see
sure.
the difference between when he's playing well and when he's not. So listen, it's as we're edging closer and closer to the trade deadline. This is the time for Jalen to step it up. And if not, I wonder if with this fixture congestion, as we call it in soccer, I don't know if they call it that in the US. I wonder if we finally get to see Cam Whitmore.
Yeah, fair question. I've thought about that. Yeah, the G League guys that have been going down there, this is the stretch where teams, if for no other reason than insurance, will just bring up more bodies. But yeah, you may as well give them a run, especially if it's night 2 of a back-to-back and you think it's sort of a rest game for a number of your regulars. That's a chance to actually get him real minutes and see what happens. That's a perfect point in the schedule to do it. And, he's going down in the G League and he's executing. It's not like he's having to have a crazy high usage rate. He's shooting at a high level. He's making competent decisions. I don't see why you wouldn't at least consider it. And his performances at the G League have done nothing to, or shouldn't do anything that I can see to discourage you in terms of his viability. One last point I want to get to on the rotation, and this will be a quick minor one, but with Landale looking as rough as he does, ideally, you want to use Jeff Green, but at 37 years old, as you mentioned, there's limitations. Then either Jabari or Tari at the 5. But the idea is whoever you consider the 5, just play those as your front court. To Tari and Jabari as your 4 or 5 in some order. I'm even at a point now, I was having this discussion with a few folks last night, where I think I might prefer Boban over Landale if you get in a tight spot. At least Boban has the length to where he can make some impact just from being 7'4" with giant hands, and he's tall enough and coordinated enough to make layups on offense. With Jock, he's not mobile enough to do much defensively movement wise. He's too small for Jaren Jackson Jr. We saw that in the third quarter last night when Jaren just took him. Well, in fairness, Jaren took a lot of guys to school last night. But the point is, Landale has looked so bad, he can't even do the basic things. Boban obviously has his defensive limitations, but his height is at least something. And offensively, he can at least make layups, with which Landale, with not much explosion and being average height at best for a big man, you can't count on him to reliably do. I don't think either is ideal, but I'm at a point now where I might consider Boban before Landale. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I could see it. It's one of those situations where it can possibly be
Yeah,
worse,
it can't be
because
worse.
Landale's not been good at anything.
Yeah, exactly. And we should point out as we wrap up the show, trade season is officially upon us. December 15th is when most players signed to contracts this past offseason can be dealt. So that really opens up trade possibilities around the entire NBA, because it's not just who can be dealt, it's also that teams who might be selling good players. Now, there's probably going to be less of them than before because the play-in tournament expands potential playoff teams. So there's less motivated sellers early in the season than there used to be. But for the few that are, they can now feel confident in saying, hey, we've actually surveyed the league and we know what the best packages are. Before December 15th, you don't really know that because teams can't put all of their assets on the table. So for the Rockets, it's a big date. Obviously, Victor Oladipo, that's not someone who signed this offseason, but it's basically the same date for him. You can aggregate him in trades after 60 days. And basically, December 15th is about 60 days from when the KPJ trade was executed in mid-October. So you'll have Oladipo's salary to aggregate, but then your offseason signings like Jock Landale and Jeff Green. I don't think they want to move Jeff Green, but Jock Landale's salary, basically a human TPE, all that year-to-year optionality, expiring salary. This is at a point where he could conceivably be an asset. One reason why you never let Landale go is because bare minimum, he's useful on the trade market. Well, starting December 15th, which is today, that's when moves could conceivably be made. Now, I don't expect that to actually transpire this soon. I think the Rockets are still evaluating their options. And as mentioned, I don't think the league's activity is really going to pick up until the new year, and especially leading up to the February trade deadline. But at least more options are open. And so I want to tie that into the Landale discussion because some people who maybe aren't as well versed on the business side of the NBA will ask, he's so bad, why is he still on the roster, or to admit he's a mistake? He's not really a mistake because a lot of why he was signed was for the trade value, that filler basically being a human TPE to where you can match salaries, and that window is just starting. So there's plenty of reason to keep Jock Landale around, even if he's not going to play. It just may take until closer to the trade deadline for some of those possibilities to actually come to the forefront, and that's where maybe the Rockets can make a consolidation move to clear out this log jam they have deeper in their rotation. For now, it'll be useful because they have all these back-to-backs, but as you get closer to the All-Star break and the trade deadline, then yeah, that's the point where there's consolidation move, and maybe Landale can be the perfect filler to grease the wheels on such a transaction. Anyway, we'll talk more about that in the coming days because, again, I'm not expecting anything imminent on the Rockets front. At least I have not heard anything. And without giving too much away, I have a great guest lined up for us next week that's going to help us sort of contextualize what the options are and what the Rockets should be considering as they approach this trade deadline and what the possibilities might be. All right, I think that's everything that we wanted to cover for today, so we can bring this extended episode to a close. If you want more content before the next show, best place to get it is on Twitter or X. I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Paolo's on there at Paolo Alves NBA, and the show is on there at the Logger Line, where if you hit up the link tree in the bio, you can find not only our distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you're not already subscribed, please do leave us a positive review. All that good stuff, we'd appreciate it. But at the link tree, you can also find links to our friends, partners, and sponsors. Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, USA Today's Rockets Wire. You can consume all of their new content simply by going through the link tree at the Logger Line on Twitter/X. That is your one-stop shop for everything to do with this program, which, of course, we greatly appreciate your weekly support. All right, that will do it for today's episode. Again, for Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.